with this afternoon's Traffic Commission meeting. I will let you know that we are just one person shy of a quorum. So we're not going to take on any, hold on a second, there's a reverberation. We are expecting the person who will be the quorum to arrive in a few minutes, but we're going to get started anyway because we've got a heavy schedule. We're going to start with something that will be I'm imagining what many people came for, which is the presentation of the study recommendations regarding to residential permit parking. When we get a quorum, we will, after this presentation, we'll go forward and do the things that require voting or actions to be taken, the meat of what you're usually seeing with the Traffic Commission meeting. Is there any way to get this reverberation addressed? Testing, testing. Testing, testing. Much better. Very good. So thank you very much for your patience. We have actually our consultant standing by to be able to initiate doing the presentation for us. We're very excited about what we have to show you. We're hoping that it will not only meet with your positive response, but also shepherd a way forward in dealing with the challenges for residential permit parking. I will let you know, though, that the other elements of the parking of the Traffic Commission will take place after this presentation. So without further ado, Robert, can I turn this presentation over to you? Robert Farron from our consultant.
Thanks, everyone. Sorry for the audio. I thought I was supposed to start, but I wasn't too sure, and I didn't want to interrupt anyone. Can everyone see my screen?
No, people can't hear, nor can they see the screen. Oh, you can see the screen. It's the presentation screen that you want to see, not the person's face.
Did you see the presentation? Did it just move to the next slide?
Yes.
Okay.
They cannot hear him.
You can't hear me.
Hold on a second. David's going to adjust it. The wonders of technology.
Go ahead now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, I'll get started. Thank you for the time today. These are the items we are going to cover. Quickly, the project purpose and the schedule. We'll go over briefly the stakeholder feedback we heard in phase 2, and then quickly jump into draft recommendations. I'll warn you, there's a lot of content to cover here, so I'm going to go quickly through the first few bullets and really focus most of our time on the action items, in particular phase 1 and phase 2 action items, of which the commission will be asked to consider at the end of the presentation.
Hold on a second, Robert. Hold on a second.
And I don't know if I was introduced or not.
Robert?
It's good to present again in front of the commission. I just heard, hold on.
Hold on just a second. We have visual conflict.
Okay, try now.
Try it now.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you, and there's no reverberation. Very good. Thank you
Great.
very much.
Okay. All right, we'll get started. All right, so my name is Robert Farron, and I'm with Kimley Horn, and we'll be covering these items today. So we'll get right into it. To start, as a reminder, the project purpose of this study is to efficiently utilize predominantly residential on-street parking areas, particularly for neighborhood residents. We want to balance neighborhood resident parking needs with that of business owners, contractors, and visitors, and essentially comprehensively evaluate the RPP program to identify potential improvements, of which those recommendations I'm going to share now. We started this process back in May. We've gone through multiple stakeholder engagement processes. We were in Lancaster back in late July to also gather feedback from the community, and now we're in the September timeframe where we're going to be presenting these recommendations for consideration, and then, if approved, we'll be supporting the city through implementation. A little bit about stakeholder feedback from our phase 2. We had a couple different ways where we engaged with the public. You can see here a picture of our in-person meeting on July 30th, which was well attended. Following that in-person meeting, we had an engaged survey up through August 18th, where we asked for feedback on these draft recommendations. Much of what you're going to hear today was presented in the public meeting, although there have been some changes to these recommendations based on that community feedback, both from the in-person meeting as well as on the survey. And we've gotten some great media coverage to really amplify the message and really help people understand that the city's taking a look at the RPP program and that there are going to be some recommended changes coming soon. Some of the feedback, kind of flavor of feedback we heard from the community feedback, certainly around parking enforcement, questions around consistency and efficiency, questions around one of the recommendations to utilize license plate recognition or LPR technology, feedback and questions around permit eligibility, some feedback around multifamily maximums, meaning with new development occurring, are certain properties going to receive RPP or not receive RPP, depending on how large of a development they are. Digging into a little bit more of the land uses, who's eligible or not eligible, and some feedback around the recognition that there may be available parking, but it may be at a price, and there may be areas where there just isn't off-street parking for residents, and where RPP is more applicable or needed than other areas. There was a lot of feedback on the designation criteria. We'll get into it in a minute. Our recommendation to move from a block-by-block approach to a more comprehensive approach. There was definitely feedback on that, as well as the petition process. There was general feedback on signage. I think overarching feedback on making the signage more clear for permit holders and non-permit holders. There were some kind of questions and feedback around marking parking spaces, really to make sure we're getting more, on-street, more efficiency out of those spaces, general loading and unloading challenges, and some general questions and feedback around the current program, and not even as much future recommendations, but just how current aspects of the program currently work. Feedback on the permit fees. We are recommending a progressive pricing structure. You'll see that in a minute. So there's feedback certainly on that. Finally, on the engaged survey, a little bit more detailed feedback and reinforced feedback on parking enforcement. Kind of overwhelmingly, whatever the city does, whatever the city considers for implementation, please make sure it's enforced. Again, some feedback around the designation criteria, the fees, and then just some general clarifying questions around the recommendations. But we heard these consistent themes around enforcement, the designation criteria, fees, eligibility, both in the community meeting as well as, certainly as well as on the engaged survey. So based on that feedback, we did modify some of the recommendations. I'll talk about those modifications as we move through, as we move through these recommendations. So we've broken the recommendations into 3 phases. As we got into the details about the RPP program, there are quite a few aspects of the program that we are recommending adjustments to. And it's a recognition that not everything can be done at once. There are staffing kind of resource needs. And also we want to take a more iterative approach to determine what works best and what might need to be adjusted over time. So we've broken down the recommendations into 3 phases. Phase 1, we're recommending starting in 2024, but implementing in 2025. Phase 2 would be piloting several actions that work would start in 2024 later on this year and be implemented in 2025. And then phase 3 actions down the road that would be implemented across the entire program and would be implemented in 2026 and in part be implemented based off of evaluation of the pilot that would occur in 2025. So some immediate actions to take place starting this year and into next year's program, and then looking at piloting some features under a phase 2. Phase 1 actions. So again, starting this work in 2024, implementing in 2025. Some of the key traits of these actions. None of these, based on our review of the city code, require code changes. Further actions do down the road. These do not. They can generally be implemented without any additional program changes. Meaning, if the commission just says phase 1 or just goes to the pilot phase 2, but doesn't end up going up to a phase 3, the value would not be lost in these changes. These would lead to improved customer service and overall effectiveness of the current program. And again, the majority of these actions could be implemented relatively quickly ahead of the 2025 application process. In fact, none of these action items we're going to talk about here in a minute have a direct impact on the renewal process upcoming for the 2025 permit year. We know that renewal process is going to start in earnest in the next few weeks. And so none of these things would affect that application process or any kind of notification process around renewals for 2025. Here are the 5 action items that would be slated under phase 1. These are highly administrative in nature. One is to provide more detail on RPP exemptions in looking at institutional uses and developing institutional use exemptions. We have a slide for each one of these, so we'll go through these step by step here. Defining an appeal process, developing more consistent information online for new and recurring applicants across both the city website as well as the parking authority's website, establishing a tiered renewal process. Again, that would not impact this year's renewal, but would positively impact future years' renewal. And one of the most important recommendations coming out of phase 1 is to implement license plate recognition technology for enforcement as well as data gathering. So under the exemption action items, we're recommending that the city develop an institutional use exemption. Right now, institutional uses are in very much an ad hoc manner through appeal to the commission, granted permits on a case-by-case basis, and we're recommending that process be streamlined and create some consistency. So create an application form that for institutions that lack off-street parking and that are located on RPP, these uses that are located adjacent to those RPP restricted streets, and that they would have to document a parking need. Based on that information that's submitted via the application, up to 5 permits could be issued per institution, and we would tie that to street parking availability. And there's some slides further down that talk about the metrics that would be used to evaluate whether the program is successful based on occupancy and based on permit use. And so you're going to see that later, and that would be integrated into this application process. Also defining an appeal process for the Traffic Commission to consider for designating RPP blocks, adjusting RPP blocks. So if an existing RPP block has a certain restriction, a process to appeal and look at a different type of strategy, determining the type of RPP on a block, and issuing permits in excess of stated minimums. These are all things the Commission are currently doing, and from what we understand, a fairly ad hoc case-by-case basis. So defining that appeal process, creating an intake form, creating a checklist, and providing the applicants of that appeal some more consistency and expectation of what's going to happen in the process, and also for the Traffic Commission, so that everyone understands the rules of engagement if you're going to appeal any decision that's made through the Traffic Commission or through city staff recommendations. We want to increase information online for new and recurring applicants. Right now, again, the information is kind of spread between two different websites, and it's not the same information, so we want to consolidate all the information on a page on the city site and on the LPA site. Through that, developing customer frequently asked questions. The LPA in particular gets questions from time to time about the program. Being able to put that information online, cut down on the number of calls and some of the frustration that customers may experience with not understanding all the different facets of the program. Creating that FAQ is really important. Developing an online eligibility and restriction map. Right now, some of that information exists on different websites, but creating a one-stop shop where I can go on a map, I can type in my address, I can see where the current restrictions are. Again, trying to educate the customer ahead of time, educate the resident ahead of time, so that they understand the process and understand what the expectation is going to be if and when they apply for a permit. And then again, drive customers to the online platforms to increase flexibility. Future phase actions are calling for more use of technology. And so we want people to have access to that technology, feel comfortable going online and accessing that information, so that when those different products become available in the future, that'll be a seamless transition for them. The fourth action here is to establish a tiered renewal process. As I mentioned, the renewal process for the upcoming year is not going to change, but essentially right now, if you are a current RPP holder and you renew your permit, it is generally like a new application. You have to submit all the new documents again, submit the application, and because we've gone digital, we're going to go digital with enforcement, and because we're gathering a lot of information online, we're recommending that you move to an auto-renew process, and that every 3 years, you would request new updated information, but in the interim years, permit holders would only need to attest that information has not changed, and then that would be able to expedite their renewal process and create more of a one-click situation, as opposed to having to upload documents or trying to scour for documents and then having to either come in the office, mail things in, go online. Trying to streamline the process for existing permit holders. And lastly, and most importantly, for phase 1 recommendations, again, to start this year, be implemented in 2025, is to implement license plate recognition technology. This is a widely used parking enforcement technology. It's the same type of camera system you would see on a turnpike, or that is fixed on a lot of other types of toll roads. These cameras are mounted on parking enforcement vehicles, and they are integrated into the permit system, so that when a parking enforcement officer is driving down the street, the license plate reader is reading those plates. It is in real time determining, do they have a permit or not have a permit? So it allows for really efficient, effective enforcement. It also collects parking occupancy data. So each time that camera is reading plates, it's collecting XY coordinates of where that vehicle is on the street in which it's parked. And that's going to be really important information as we go through our our phase 2 action items, to determine how many cars are parking on the street, and if those cars are resident demand driven or demand driven from outside the neighborhood. So these are the phase 1 action items. And we have phase 2 and phase 3. If there are any immediate questions, I can answer those now, and kind of clarifying questions. Otherwise, I can move to the phase 2 action items.
Are
So
there,
I'll pause there for a second.
thank you, Robert. Are there any key questions regarding what has been presented regarding phase 1? First from the commission. Hearing none from the public, would you please come to the podium and make sure that it's been turned on, that it should show green. Oops. And just state your name and block of the 100 block in which you live.
Henry Tober, 300 Block College Avenue. With regards to license plate recognition technology being used, would that technology also be scanning cars on streets that don't have permit parking scheduled or assigned?
So that would be up to the Lancaster Parking Authority to determine how they would be using that technology aside from permit parking enforcement. In our discussions with the Lancaster Parking Authority, they indicated that they would use this beyond just permit parking. But I would have to follow up with them, or we would need to follow up with them to determine how they would be implementing this technology.
Yeah, because I'd be really interested. I'd be really interested in trying to understand why they would be doing
it. The ability to enforce time limit restrictions as well in a much more effective manner than not using license plate recognition technology.
Well, I understand it.
And as noted, it would also be able to be used for data collection as part of the RPP designation process.
While I understand the reference for the permit parking streets, I don't understand why they would need to collect data for streets that aren't having it assigned. And I don't think there are many people here who are fans of data collection just for the sake of collecting data. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there other comments? Please come to the podium.
Just in response to that, Lilia Nice, 400 block of North Mary Street.
Thank you.
In response to that, one of the reasons you may want to look at the other streets is that there are people who have permits who cannot park on their street. And so they are parked somewhere else, and you'll be able to pick that up through the data collection.
Thank you very much. Are there other comments or questions regarding phase 1 from the public?
And I'll just say we're piecing together the tech a little bit, so he can't always hear what you're saying, so I'm typing it in. So just if he's not responding, that's what's happening.
Please.
Bill Hannigan, 300 block of College Avenue. I have not heard enough information to understand the 2-block perimeter to make a place or a 2-block area acceptable and eligible, or whether you have an incomplete 2-block area. And if one leg of that 2 blocks isn't RPP, does that disqualify the rest of the blocks that are in the RPP zone? I happen to live on College Avenue, which is not RPP, but to Walnut, West End, and beyond, I believe Marietta, there are definitely RPP regulations in place. So if we don't get the segment of 300 block of College Avenue included, do we lose our eligibility as an adjacent street to have or not have RPP?
I think that's a very good question. I think, Robert, did you get all of that question?
Yes, that's a great question, and we're going to get to that here in phase 2 action.
Okay, thank you.
Are there other questions or comments about phase 1 part of the presentation?
Carolyn Salisbury, 34 East Vine Street. I was interested in knowing if the plate recognition, in the event that my street is, the parking permit area is filled, I just go across the street, park at a parking meter. to run into my house just for seconds. It has happened several times. I come out and I have a $20 parking ticket. Would the plate recognition, would that go back to say, okay, I have a parking permit, and just kind of take for granted that I'm just parking there a few seconds? The only access to my house is from the street, the front door.
Robert, did you get that question?
Yeah, the license plate recognition technology would scan a license plate. It would determine if that vehicle has parking rights. That could be a permit. That could be payment. That could be some other type of credential. That doesn't necessarily change the underlying rules. So if a permit is not valid at a meter, you have to pay the meter. The LPR would not change that process. It would just identify a more effective manner if that license plate has parking rights. So that the underlying rules about the permit and where it's good, where it's valid, and where it's not valid would not change with LPR.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is your block, you have RPP on a block that has parking meters?
Across the street. I'm right across from the convention center, and they put in 4 parking meters.
Hold on, there's a little bit of a discussion going on in the background.
But my street is, where I'm allowed to park is usually full because of all the activity. And that's
We're going to, if there are no further questions about phase 1, we'd like to be able to go into phase 2. Thank you. Robert?
Okay. All right, so let's move on to phase 2 action items. As a reminder, these would start to be worked on, if approved by the Traffic Commission this year, and be implemented next year. But these phase 2 action items, so unlike phase 1, which are broader program-wide changes, phase 2 is very much focused on piloting these action items in several areas of the city to either modify or create new RPP districts under these new rules. So these would not apply. The things I'm going to talk about here, phase 2, do not apply citywide. They would apply to and under a pilot or number of pilot programs the city would administer in 2025. Some of these action items would require city code changes. However, based on them being pilot programs, there is an expectation that those code changes would then take effect after the pilot. They could be, again, these would be implemented via pilot program in several areas. These test action items are in the 2 areas that have been selected, although there could be flexibility for additional, were identified kind of through this moratorium period of folks requesting RPP. And also just based on the community feedback through this study process. Once the pilot is evaluated, once the pilot evaluation is completed, these will be implemented program-wide if deemed successful. So if they met the performance metrics that have been outlined, and also based on feedback from the public and city staff who are administering this. We believe they can be implemented relatively quickly in small areas, and we're not recommending the moratorium goes away necessarily, that any new RPP requests would fall under these pilot conditions. It would be subject to the city determining how many pilot programs would occur over this upcoming year. There's 4 key aspects of the phase 2 action items. One is to define RPP district eligibility criteria. Get into that in a minute. Revise the RPP approval process. Develop RPP restriction guidelines, meaning what restriction is implemented on the RPP street if approved, and redesigning the RPP restriction signage. So these are items that were presented in the community meeting, were tested with feedback from the community meeting as well as the engaged survey. And there have been a couple modifications based on that feedback that you're going to see here. You can see our subsequent slides. So just as a reminder, kind of from the district eligibility criteria standpoint, the current process is there are no entrance requirements. There's kind of no look at the land use on the block or to determine is RPP the right parking demand management strategy for that block. It is a block by block approach. The map you see here is an overlay showing the broader zones. The color codes, and I think we presented this before, the color codes indicate at a zone level how many permits have been issued per parking space. So in the orange areas, more than one per space. In the green areas, less than one permit per space. And then the red lines underneath are the current RPP streets. So you can see both. There's a little bit of Swiss cheese effect going on with where the RPP streets are. And then based on how the districts are drawn up right now, there is inequity in terms of how many permits are being issued per space. This is a petition-led process, and we're not recommending any changes to that. It's very subjective in terms of the rules and regulations and how a street becomes an RPP street. And fundamentally, it lacks current conditions data. There is not currently an analysis that goes along with establishing RPP streets. And again, this leads to a patchwork of regulations that's generally inequitable in how we prioritize parking. At the end of the day, RPP is a tool that is used to prioritize what vehicles should be parked on that street and what vehicles may not have rights, unfettered rights, to park on the street. This is another map showing at a block level number of permits issued per parking space. So as you drill in even further, there are red streets on this map. There aren't too many of them, but there are some streets where there's actually more than 3 permits being issued to every parking space, just based on the density of those streets and based on the number of permits that have been issued to those household addresses. Green, conversely, are blocks where, based on those addresses adjacent to that street, there's been less than 1 permit issued to each parking space. And it does potentially start to call the question, is that the right tool, or is a tool needed to prioritize resident parking or parking in general over a first-come, first-served basis? So we want to move that from the current process to something that is a little more rooted in data. When we look at scale, again, we talk about this is a block-by-block approach. Some cities have gone to a zone base. So if you saw the zones from the previous slides, you would literally say, okay, that whole zone now is RPP streets, and they all have some type of restriction. We felt like that was a bit of an overreach based on how the zones are drawn up and based on the mix of uses and generally historic nature of these areas of Lancaster. And so we came up with a hybrid approach to the 2x2 block guideline. This was presented at the community meeting and has not changed. Other aspects have changed, but the 2x2 block remains to get away from the block by block, but not go so far reaching that we have extended areas beyond the 2 blocks potentially of RPP restrictions, at least unless folks go through the process and determine that RPP is the right demand management tool for those areas. So we're still under the recommendation of a 2x2 block guideline. And we've identified proactively, based on feedback and some requests that have come in during the moratorium period, of 2 areas that we would test out these recommendations. One is a southeast zone expansion. You kind of see it Ann, Plum, and Green. And then a northwest zone expansion, James, Charlotte, Pine, and Lemon. These are not the exact boundaries. These are general boundaries. And these would be areas that would initially be the 2 pilots that residents in the city would walk through this process I'm going to talk about to determine if RPP is the right tool, If so, what flavor of RPP is installed? And then the new signage would go up and there would be LPR enforcement. One of the checklists that the city would go through in determining if these pilots are conducive under the new program is to look at the land use and determine if the blocks are predominantly residential in nature. They would look at external traffic generators and determine if they are adjacent to significant non-residential uses. They would look at the residential density and the presence of increased multifamily density that's creating additional parking pressures. And they would conduct a high-level review of surrounding parking options to determine, based on kind of all this criteria, do these two pilots make sense? And we do believe that for these two, they do. We've kind of gone through that high-level vetting process, but we would encourage the city to still go through that as part of this pilot and determine if these areas generally meet these requirements of being predominantly residential, having external traffic generators that are causing parking demand issues, that there are also some density considerations we need to have for residential, and that there is limited off-street parking. Not to say if there's ample off-street parking that the road stops, but it's a consideration in determining if RPP is the appropriate tool to mitigate parking demand on these streets. There's kind of a clearing, there's an initial step there before the petition process to determine would these areas be eligible for RPP. Now we go through the approval process. This approval process already exists. We did hear, based on the 2x2 block area, that receiving 75% of petitions in the affirmative felt like a higher bar that could create a situation where RPP is never expanded. So we lowered it to 60%. Still kept the 2x2, but reduced it to 60%. So now 60% signatures would have to be collected on 60% of the area in the 2x2 block. Resident signatures only if the property owner or the renter in the affirmative that they want to go down this path to establish RPP. All properties will still have to be notified if the permit restrictions are implemented, but you wouldn't have to get signatures from those that are non-residential in nature. The block would still be 2x2. To answer the gentleman's question earlier, if there's one block of RPP that exists now and you're trying to kind of fill out the 2x2 block area, then you would count that one block. Conversely, if there's only one block left and you're surrounded by RPP, you would follow this process. So it's not I have to be 2x2 block. If not, I can't do anything. I'm kind of stuck. We're saying that when there is an RPP in the area or there isn't a gap, we're saying there needs to be a 2x2 block approach so that we're not creating those gaps in those kind of one-off situations that then create some additional challenges down the road. And then the fundamental piece of this is the parking study. The fundamental piece to document overall parking utilization and documenting external traffic generators and how they're impacting resident parking. And so we're recommending the city to select 2 to 3 days to collect data to fulfill those study requirements. Data will be collected during these timeframes and through LPR. So Lancaster Parking Authority is already committed. We're going to do LPR. We can collect the data for the city. The city would analyze it. And based on that analysis, we're recommending that this 2x2 block area needs to see at least 60% peak parking occupancy. And of that 60+%, 50+% of that demand has to be created from outside the prospective permit area. Meaning, if there isn't a level of demand above 60%, RPP is not the appropriate parking management tool for this area. And if external traffic generators are not generating the majority of that demand, impacting residents, RPP again is not the appropriate demand management tool for that street. Not to say there is another one, not to say there is one at all. But for RPP, we want to see an external traffic generator of impacting residents to a certain threshold, and we want to see a certain threshold of parking demand being on that block or those blocks. Based on if those requirements are passed, then we go to what type of restriction happens on that street. This has not changed based on the community meeting, but based on observed demand, the city would move to implement a 2-hour restriction, either daytime or nighttime, or could actually introduce contactless payment if parking utilization that was collected during the study is above 80% based on these timeframes. I'm not going to go into great detail here, but just to show you there's a decision-making process based on the observed utilization that's observed, parking utilization that's collected to the study to determine what type of restriction happens on those streets that have gone through this process. And then lastly, from an enforcement standpoint, introducing new signage. Here are some examples of what the city could go down, but really to move away from the very text-heavy signage, of which we heard feedback on, to move to a more MUTCD, which is the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices. There's a manual on what signs should say and what they shouldn't say. So creating a clear sign that people expect so that everyone knows where they can and can't park. So this standard signage would be implemented just in the pilot areas during the 2025 calendar year. Lastly, and I'll pause, is how do we determine success? We determine success a couple different ways. One, we want to gain compliance. So we want to understand how many tickets are being written versus how many vehicles are in compliance with the rules. We're going to use LPR data for that. We want to see at least 4 out of 5, at least 80% or higher observed compliance rates with the implementation of these pilot zones. And then from a parking demand standpoint, we want to see between 60 and 80% observed parking occupancy. If we consistently see above 80% after RPP is put in, we need to go back to the drawing board and determine if there are other restrictions need to go into place. Conversely, if we're seeing less than 60%, we have to call into question why there's RPP in the first place. Because RPP is not a method to just keep people off my street. RPP is a method to prioritize resident parking needs when right now they're being impacted by external traffic generators. So we want to make sure we're keeping an equilibrium here. So we're going to use parking demand to determine if we're successful or not. And we're recommending these pilots are in place for at least 6 months, that the city collects data, and based on that 6-month outcome, determines if these pilots change, if they go away, and if they're successful, then moving into a phase 3 action where this process would be used citywide to audit the current program and then start to bring in new RPP zones as petition processes start to come through the system. And I'll get to those phase 3 actions in a minute, although I know we're short on time, so we'll take a really quick hit on those. I'll defer to the commission if you just want me to go right into phase 3 or pause here for questions.
Thank you again, Robert. Are there any questions from the commission members regarding phase 2 that has been presented? Are there questions from the public? Please come to the podium.
Henry Tober again, 300 Block College. I just wanted to follow up with a question that was asked earlier in regards to the general neighborhood that we live in. Most of the streets around us already have the RPP. 300 Block of College, for example, does not. Would there be a way that we could apply before 2026 to try to fill in that block if the 2x2 block process is implemented?
Did you hear the question, Robert?
I did. I'll defer to the city on that. We identified 2 pilot areas. I know there could be some flexibility there, so that's something I could certainly consider, but I would need to defer to the city on that.
Okay, and just one other question.
And let me just
Okay, I'm sorry.
say, the two key options that might be available first are if we're able to get through the data collection process soon enough so that we could implement it on a wider basis sooner than the end of 2025, Or secondly, if there's enough demand or interest by a particular community that says we need an additional pilot area.
How would we go about finding that if we're not able to submit applications currently?
It would be by petitioning, by being able to say, given the data that we currently have, which we're trying to collect as part of the process, can we be considered for as a third pilot area?
Okay.
It would require discussion. It would require an iterative process.
Okay, and last question I have at the moment would be if the 2x2 block requirement is applied. Since most of the blocks that are, like I said, around us right now are currently RPP, would we only then need to get 60% of the residents or property owners of the streets that aren't PP or RPP, or would we have to go and re-solicit people who are currently under the program?
Robert, did you hear that question?
Yes, because the recommendation is because those restrictions could change based on the outcome of this study, that we would need to draw a boundary, and that there would need to be 60% signatures, just because there would be impact to those streets.
Okay, so
how that's drawn is one of the stickier parts of this process that would be more of a collaboration between residents and the city. We as Family Park will help with this initial implementation with that as well. But there would need to be a petition process just because there are going to be opportunities for these programs to potentially change. And that would impact those existing permit holders.
Wasn't quite clear on that. Like, for example, the 300 block of West End Avenue is currently PP or RPP, and as well as several other in Walnut Street and so on. Would those residents, property owners in particular, have to be re-talked to, addressed, and questioned to get 60% of them, or do they need to be? Can they be skipped since they already have the residential permit parking?
Yeah, we would recommend that they be included so it creates a consistent 2x2 block area. So there isn't one block that's essentially on an island with different types of restrictions.
So
we'd want to work with the city on getting that out and determining kind of what those boundaries look like. Because there could be other streets that are outside of RPP now that would want to be included in that 2x2 block approach. So I think we want to follow up on that.
So then it's possible that streets that currently have RPP could fall out of it because the current residents, 60% of them, aren't in set agreement to getting it. Is that what I'm hearing?
That is correct. On a zone by zone basis, yes.
Okay.
Are there other questions from the public?
Lisa Cologne, 400 block of North Prince Street. I would like clarification. I don't know if you can go back to the slide where it says 50% and 60%. Is it possible to do that? I think it was this one. Yes. My question is, on the block that I live on specifically, it is a mixed use. So would we need 50% or 60% peak parking occupancy required by the residents, or is that external and residential that you're looking for?
So how we're determining this, there are a couple different ways. The recommendation here in Lancaster, based on the data that's available, is that 3 different counts will be taken: a 5 a.m. baseline count, which we're going to assume is resident demand, and then a noon and an evening count. The only exception to this is that there is a special event traffic generator that it just makes no sense to count cars at noon or 7 p.m. We feel like those two time frames capture external traffic, parking, impacting resident need and demand. So there would be a calculation of, I'm making numbers up. If there are 10 cars parked at 5 a.m., we're going to assume that's resident demand. And then the peak, noon or 7, there's 25 cars parked. Then we're going to say there's 15 cars that are outside the resident demand, and there's 10 cars that are the needed resident demand. Therefore, over 50% are non-resident, and it meets that criteria. As opposed to another situation where the block's full at 5 a.m., and it consistently stays full throughout the day, that's where we need to take a harder look and determine, is this the right solution? So that we're not creating a permit program where essentially the same outcome occurs.
Interesting. Okay, and as far as removing a block from permit parking, will the residents on that block have an opportunity to present their case of why they would still want the permit parking on their block? For example, you come on my block on Monday, there is a huge driver of parking that is not open. So if you would continually come on Monday, you will never see the increased parking, available. And if you come on a Friday evening, that's completely opposite. So
There's a
two
phase
questions.
3 recommendation to introduce a modification process and potentially a removal process. Because right now there is a process. Again, ad hoc, case by case. So phase 3, we're actually recommending an introduction of that. That would not occur under the pilot program. So we'll get to that in a minute. I would say with any of these removals or modifications, it would be incumbent on the city to be collecting data the days and times that make sense, and that, of course, would be a conversation with residents.
Okay, would it be public like it is now? Do you believe, or is that a city question?
I didn't hear that question.
Would it be a public opportunity to know about this information, or is that completely up to the city? Like, that's out of your purview?
When the parking study is conducted?
Right, when it is and the results, and if they're going to remove the parking.
Yeah, we would recommend that's a public notification process. But again, that would be a phase 3 implementation action item, so 2026 at the earliest.
Okay, thank you.
Are there other questions from the public? Please.
Bill Hannigan, 300 block of College Avenue. Early on, there was a word used, parking for institutions, and I don't know how to define that, and I would like some more information on high-density residential parking. For the 200 block of College Avenue, undergoing redevelopment right now, there are 65 units on one side of the block and 160 units on the other side of the block. I think they both qualify as high density. I don't know, again, what the definition of a residential or, an institutional property would be.
There is for the institutional use, there's a zoning code definition to the city of Lancaster that outlines that. Traditionally, we're thinking about kind of public uses, religious institutions, nonprofit organizations. The key there is lacking off-street parking and documenting the need. Now, that in itself is a bit subjective, but there would be an application process for that and a vetting of those requests. But there is a general definition in the zoning code of that for institutional use. For density, that's something we would work with the city on determining kind of what that definition is, and it could very much be ranges, but we will lean on the land use zoning classification codes. We've already done some preliminary analysis on that. To kind of determine where those breakpoints would be in the number of units. But we would be leaning on kind of that existing data to determine how we define high density versus kind of lower density. But those are kind of administrative items that if this were to be considered for approval we would work through under a pilot condition and ultimately refine those as we went from pilot to scale to implementation, in 2026 and beyond in phase 3.
Thank you. That's
Those are great questions we've been asking ourselves and things that we're going to be refining as we go through the pilot program.
your clarification is very good. I was aware of this meeting only because I received an email announcing that this was going to be the topic, and I want to thank the commission for doing that. I would ask the commission to make an effort to get into the government calendar, which appears in the newspaper every Monday. That's a very convenient way for me to stay informed about these meetings. I can't remember the last time I saw Traffic Commission listed among those, and that would be, I think, a step of improving public awareness and public engagement for these types of meetings. Thank you.
That's a very good recommendation. Thank you very much. Usually we do. I think what you're saying is very important for us to be proactively aware of. Thank you. Yes, please.
Lilia Nice, 400 block of North Mary Street. I was just looking at the times that you were doing your studies, 5, noon, and 7. Can I make the assumption that at some point we could, in the neighborhood, talk to the city about changing those times? For example, right now we have Luca, Cavallar, and soon to be Brendy's opening, and their peak hours are different, but at least 2 of them are 8 o'clock and above. So will there be an opportunity for us to talk with you and say, this is what we're really seeing. 7 o'clock isn't the best read.
These are recommended guidelines. There was a question earlier. I think it'd be incumbent on the city to ask. So remember, this study is done after 60% of petitions have been signed in the affirmative, and so that process has already started. So there's already that communication now between resident petitioners in the city. And so it would be incumbent on during that communication to confirm these timeframes. These are general guidelines, and I would stay hard and fast to the 5 a.m. baseline, and I would stay pretty hard and fast to some kind of noon count. And I think where there may be some variation is in this evening. I would caution the city in recommendation to not customize it so much that it becomes an administrative kind of challenge. There does need to be some consistency across this to compare. But I think you're bringing up great points that whether it's 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock, I'm not sure is going to be that much of a difference, but worthy of a conversation as you're getting through the petition process and you've achieved that 60+% threshold.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions, please?
Just one more small clarification. When you were talking about 60% approval for application, is that individuals within a rental unit, say, or homeowner, or is it just one property? Like if there's 2 people in an apartment, is that both of them would count as part of the 60, or just the unit itself or home itself?
Robert, you heard the question?
I would defer back to the city on the current process, but my inclination is by address.
By address.
Unit. So it's not like if myself and my partner live in a unit, then you would need to get both of our signatures.
Right.
Tied to the percentage is tied to the address, not necessarily the population that lives on the block. So if there's 10 addresses, you need to get at least 6 of those addresses if they're residential to say yes.
That makes it a lot easier. Thank you.
Thank you. I do want us to be able to continue to move forward. There's still the rest of the conventional traffic commission agenda to get through. Are there any other key questions regarding the presentation of phase 2? Robert, can you wrap us up with phase 3 and the request?
Yes, and I'm going to go quickly, and not because I want to just gloss over things. I know we're at time, actually, but I just want to note a couple of these items. There's a lot of items on this list. This is the recognition that we want to get to the pilot program first and determine the success of that based on those metrics. To determine if this needs to go citywide, if it goes citywide, these changes go citywide, we want to implement those with pilot program actions, but we also want to introduce a couple other features to the RPP program. And so I'm actually just going to walk through these slide by slide right now instead of reading them off here. One, we've already mentioned. There's not a documented modification process to the RPP right now, so we would develop a process based on what you just heard. The eligibility criteria, the approval process, all the RPP restrictions, we would go through that process. So the city would go on a multi-year effort to look and determine, are these blocks still be eligible under the new program, meaning all the different metrics we talked about, and then include a phase-out process for non-conforming RPP districts over a multi-year time frame. So this is not something that would happen in 2026. It would start in 2026 and take multiple years. We want to apply, what we don't want to have happen is people under different definitions and different rules of engagement with RPP. We want eventually the whole system to be under the one new requirement and one new process. Part of that is defining address eligibility. There are currently 20% of RPP addresses actually fall outside of RPP streets. Lancaster has a fairly unique rule in its current RPP rules that streets or addresses, a block, and sometimes even 2 blocks off of an RPP restricted street can get RPP. And so we're recommending that phase out over a multi-year process and then explore ways to unlock other off-street parking, municipal parking garages, shared parking through surface lots to still meet those needs, but determine that issuing RPP to addresses multiple blocks away from RPP restricted streets is impacting those RPP holders that are adjacent to those streets. So we're recommending a little more scrutiny on address eligibility and phasing out those addresses that are fairly far removed, and you see the blue dots here, fairly far removed from existing restricted RPP streets. Aside from eligibility and modifying existing RPP blocks, there's some elements around permit types that we're recommending changes to. We're not recommending any changes to resident permit requirements or business permit requirements. And I'm not going to go through the current program specifics. There were a lot of questions around that in the community meeting. That's what we stated here. None of that would change under the recommended program. What would change is the removal of the contractor permit, which is barely used now and really no one knows about, and enhancing the temporary permit. Right now, there's some different time frames involved. We want to create a standard 90-day temporary permit. So if someone moves into a unit, can't meet all the requirements, they can have up to 90 days to create some consistency. Right now, there's different time frames. And then the probably most impactful of all these permit type recommendations is to enhance the visitor permit and move it from I have to know how many days I need the permit to create a flexible annual permit, where if I'm a resident, I can get a permit and then I can get a visitor permit and I can put a license plate on that permit for up to 20 days in a month. So if that's a caregiver, home health, the dog walker, lawn care, mother-in-law, whatever it is, I can put the plate on there, but it does not mean I just put my third permit that I couldn't get from the city, I put that third plate on there. That would run afoul of it being a visitor permit. But we want to provide flexibility to resident permit holders if they want to have a visitor over, and so this would allow that flexibility beyond what the current system allows. From a fee structure standpoint, we're recommending 2 things: the introduction of a low-income permit price of $20 per year for the first permit and the second permit, so $20 each, based on eligibility criteria. And then for those that do not meet a low-income permit pricing structure, moving to a progressive pricing structure that we're seeing more cities do, including Philadelphia just recently, and increasing the rates a bit. The first term will be $30 annually, the second $60, and right now there's a cap of 2, but we know there's an appeal process. We know the commission has approved those appeals in the past, and if that third was approved, it would be $120 for the year. Just to compare that to some other jurisdictions, some allow a third permit, some don't. Philadelphia is just moving. The current rates are in black on the left. They're moving to a flat fee across the board of $75 each. And after a third permit, you can't get another permit. There's no appeal process. Columbus has a progressive pricing structure, Hoboken as well. We looked at a couple others. These on a day-to-day basis are not going to necessarily change someone's habit, but I think overall there's a recognition there's a value to this permit. We want to apply a value to that permit, and we want to make people kind of think about, do I need 1 permit, do I need 2? If I do, great, but there's going to be an increased fee for those. Fees go back into the system. They pay for enforcement. They pay for program administration overall. This is not a revenue generator for the city or the parking authority. This is a means to help administer a program that generally, nationally, ends up costing cities more. So trying to at least recoup costs. And then enforcement. So we've heard loud and clear more enforcement. And so based on implementing LPR and seeing that implemented for multiple years, and seeing the new program eligibility requirements and the new rules in place, determining, do we need different staffing levels? In particular, do we need to increase daytime staff and then nighttime based on the current staffing structure? We're not saying hire more officers right now. We want to see how LPRs, we expect LPR to create some efficiencies for parking authority staff. But there's a recognition we may need to add more staff over time so that we can have that high level of service that permit holders expect and make sure that we're maintaining compliance on streets. Lastly, I already talked about the city exploring some options for residents to have either discounted rates, evening permit programs, and municipal parking authority parking facilities, or exploring opportunities in the neighborhood where there may be a church that only uses parking during certain times, or a bank that closes at 5, and are there opportunities to share that parking, better utilize that parking when we have such a demand on the street. We've seen some success in places like Pittsburgh and Louisville, where there's discounts for residents to leverage and utilize municipal parking when there's not as much demand in those facilities. Most of that demand occurs during the day and early evening, and not necessarily overnight. So I moved through that really quickly because I know, again, we're at time. The action request to the commission to consider today is to approve phase 1 recommended actions and approve the pilot phase 2 recommended actions with subsequent phase 3 or any modifications to the pilot coming back to the traffic commission for approval. As a reminder, these phase 1 actions would be developing the institutional use exemptions, defining the appeal process, increasing information online for new and recurring applicants, establishing a tiered renewal process, and utilizing LPR technology to enforce the RPP system. And phase 2 would be under a pilot program defining and utilizing those eligibility criteria for determining if RPP is the right tool for a street or streets, revising the RPP approval process, in particular the 60% petition process in the 2x2 block zone, developing RPP restriction guidelines based off of observed occupancies and utilization on the street, and testing out new RPP signage for enforcement purposes in these pilot areas. So I'll go back to this slide and I will pause for any questions or comments. That's the conclusion of the presentation.
Thank you again very much, Robert. Simply put, for phase 1, there's no changes to any regulations. It would be administrative changes to be able to put those actions in place. And then phase two would be to be able to put a pilot program in place that would test the assumptions and be able to be tweaked to determine how the program would go forward after implementation of that pilot. In many ways, I just want to remind us all that we know that and think that parking is simple, but it is not. That nearly 80% of the people had indicated that it was not, that RPP as currently instituted was not a horrible problem, but it did identify some key problems that I think much of this proposal addresses in one form or another. So the request is to be given approval for phase one, moving forward with phase one recommended actions, and approval to move forward with a pilot. Any comments or questions from the commission?
We need to make a decision on this today.
What would be if we are able to make a decision on this today, then we can advance these discussions and processes and the further consideration before the end of this current fiscal year, and get things laid in place and get the pilot started for fiscal 25. I'm going to ask this question, as phase one recommended actions and as a phase two pilot, it allows us to test things and be able to make adjustments going forward. It does not say that they are set in stone, but it allows us to not only recognize the challenges that we have a way that's been considered and has had a goodly amount of public input as a way to experiment with going forward and see what works and see how it works. It would allow us also then, under the pilot, to make tweaks and adjustments as necessary, and not just adopt the pilot as written as the way forward.
So then, should we add this to the action agenda?
That's what we would like to be able to do, yes.
You want to add that? All right, then, if we want to proceed, since our last one is 45-2024, we should make this 46-2024 for phase one, and 47-2024 for phase two, since both have to be acted independently.
Okay?
So I make a motion to approve phase one of the recommended actions on the RPP program.
That would be 46,
46-2024.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
There's a motion and a second. Is there further discussion at the commission level? Any comment from the public?
Lisa Cologne, 400 Block of North Prince Street. My only concern with voting today is the fact that it was not considered as an action agenda, and therefore there might be members of the public who would have liked to have made a comment before an official vote was taken.
Thank you very much for that. Comments, concerns?
Well, that was my, one of my questions was, should we, do this for the November, put it on there as the action, agenda for November? That was my key,
Yeah, I don't believe that we can actually add it as an action item, but it was on the agenda, I guess, and the commission is, yeah, I guess approving or recommending moving forward with those items.
So,
that's where, that was my key question, because, I didn't see it on here. I know it appeared previously as information, but not as an action agenda.
well, it's on the agenda, I guess, yeah, it didn't get added as an actual number in the action. I mean, I guess if we have to wait, then we can wait until the November
Yeah,
meeting, since there's, yeah, and there's no, pressing issues. I think we could probably, some of the stuff is more administrative anyway, and we could probably start to work towards some of that,
behind
you
the
know,
scenes.
yeah, as far as improving information and, those kind of things. So,
That's,
And then we would be able to come forward at the November meeting with perhaps a clearer, not schedule, but listing of the action items.
so then I'll postpone my motion.
Is there any further comment? Further comment or request at the commission level? I'm assuming that means you're withdrawing your,
I'm withdrawing the motion.
okay. Any further comment or question at the commission level? Any further comment or question at the public level? Please.
What is going to happen between now and November that would change anything that is up there now? In other words, I don't understand why you're putting off acting. A lot of us live in neighborhoods where parking is one of the biggest stressors in our lives. And we'd kind of like to see it move and move into this study phase sooner than later.
I think we're going to address this further, make more information to the public.
So, to answer your question, not much would change. That the intention of getting this approval, which I'm imagining we could conceivably do on an administrative level anyway, is to start the process of examining the processes, if you pull up that list of items for phase one, Robert. Trying to start developing what the policies would look like, what the appeal process might look like, and things like that. That can be happening behind the scenes. So that, I think the challenge at this moment is that if we vote on it as approval, quote unquote, without it having been announced according to Hoyle, that it might be challenged and get a further delay. And I appreciate it because I would like for us to move forward as quickly as possible. I'm hoping, as Cindy had indicated, that some of this work could still go forward to support what the recommendation is, the approval recommendation is, so that we don't lose much time. We may lose a little bit of time, but not much time, because we are committed to making revisions and some RPP reform. But I don't want us to inadvertently have done something that might be deemed illegal. Yes, Mr. Hannon?
Thank you, sir. Bill Hannigan, 300 block of College Avenue. I followed an issue for 3 years with city code regarding tree protection and the tree ordinance. And I witnessed in February something coming out of the Public Works Committee early on that month. And by the end of the month, it was out there for council to vote on, and it was approved. Ms. Diaz voted against that. It basically gutted a 10-year standing policy on what was a protected tree and what was a legacy tree. There were two definitions. And I think most of us were shocked by the undercutting of that. And I have learned in the past week that ordinance has been stayed by or vacated by court. that was challenged in a legitimate way, and the people who offered that challenge won a favorable decision. So I would caution you against going with haste without courting the public and embracing awareness at the public level. I think, again, we'd wind up in court, and you wouldn't like that to happen, I'm sure.
Thank you very much. Any other comments of the Commissioner? Please, sir.
Again, Henry Tober, 300 Block of College. I just have a question in regards, if you vote today with what you were proposing earlier, if I wanted to request having a third pilot with our neighborhood, would voting today prevent me from submitting that?
No, it would not.
Okay. Also, with what Bill had mentioned earlier about he only heard about this meeting because of an email he had received, I think and I don't know most of the processes here. I'm new to coming to different meetings and so on. But if there is an opportunity that more people could have some say before the vote is taken, and they aren't provided that because of deciding to do it today, you're doing those individuals a disservice. Thank you.
Understood. Thank you very much for those comments. Anything further? So at this particular moment, there's, Commissioner?
I would also recommend that we hold off to make sure that the public are aware, because sometimes we do rush things, and then before we know it, then we have a crowd of people saying, why wasn't I informed, or, I didn't get that information, and I think it would be helpful to do so.
Very good. So at this particular moment, there is no motion on the table for this item. And as such, we're proposing that it may be on the agenda for the November Traffic Commission meeting.
Correct.
Anything further then? Thank you very, very much, and I appreciate everyone's indulgence in that regard. Now let us get to the other aspects of the Traffic Commission meeting. I apologize for how long this took. Thank you very, very much, Robert, for your presentation and for the consideration. There's a lot of things that we're going to try to get through in a relatively short amount of time, so please bear with us. The first item on the agenda is the July 2024 meeting minutes.
I make a motion to approve July 2024 meeting minutes.
There's a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Old business, old business, item 26, 2024, considering the request of Michael Armour, who's requesting a traffic study for the addition of stop signs at South Shippen Street and Locust Street to have stop signs in all directions instead of only on Locust. Sure. Is Mr. Armour here? She does. Mindy has an update. Then, Mindy, if you have an update for that, please, quickly.
Yes, I spoke with him via email.
Can you speak a little bit into the?
There we go, okay. I spoke with him via email, let him know that this had been looked at in August of 2022. And at that time, the always stop is not warranted, but cross traffic does have stop signs are added to clarify. I asked him if he still wanted to be seen, and he said that at this time he does not wish to have a traffic study done.
Okay. Thank you very, very much. So that means this item can just be tabled?
I think we just make a motion to deny, and then it's removed from the agenda for the, so I'll make a motion to deny 26-24.
Motion to deny, is there a
Seconded.
motion and a second? Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Is Mr. Sweeney here? Is Mr. Joel Velez here? Is Adriana Atencio here? Is there any information about these particular items under old business?
There is, yeah, some, but I think if we could, maybe for the sake of people that have been waiting, to address theirs, and then we can circle back to those.
Very good. So we're going to skip through items 28, 30, and 32. We're going to go to the action agenda. Item 39, 2024, considering new school Montessori to add a loading zone at 24 North Lime Street. Just identify yourself and
Robin Stern, head of school for New School Montessori.
thank you.
So we have approximately 50 students coming in the morning and then leaving in the afternoon. And at some point, I was directed to apply for a loading zone, and that would be the best way to keep that one space that's directly in front of the door, because the other space actually is no parking. So like you can see right near the kiosk, there's a sign that indicates that there's no parking from there to Grant Street. And so for this week, we purchased the space as I was directed to, as an alternative to keep the kids safe for this week. And it's been working really well, so I'm not sure what our other options are, beyond sort of a no parking school days. I'm not really sure how to achieve safety for the kids and to, I was given the reason by the sergeant, that it was because they needed to preserve residential parking. However, what I can tell you from my very non-scientific study of being in the building is that there's very few cars parked there during the day. It seems to be the nighttime that is the challenge for residents.
And do children get delivered exclusively by car, or are there buses or minibuses that bring children as well?
There could be district buses that come. This year, it's our first year, so we don't have a lot of kindergarten students, so we don't have any buses this academic year yet, but in the future, that is a possibility.
And was there an exploration of other alternatives rather than just the loading zone, creating the loading zone?
We have, we were hoping at some point that maybe behind the building there would be an opportunity to purchase spaces from the parking. It's a paid parking lot, but understandably so with insurance with his parking lot, and that it's all paid parking by other people. He doesn't even have any spaces available. So he was very, obviously, was afraid to sort of have people going into the gates and then taking paid spaces possibly. So that was really our only other option.
Did we do any review on the staff level?
We did not. Other than what, is included in the packet where the Sergeant Thrace, I believe, reviewed it relative to the loading zone. And he is the one that denied it, and then also our traffic group reviewed as well.
And the reasons for its denial have to do with where the nature of the safety of any students? Can you just outline briefly what the...
So I guess one of them was limited parking by the parking authority. Other remarks were one-way street, parking on both sides, possible off-street parking. LPA kiosk is in the proposed loading zone, possible sightline issues. I guess, is your request now just for the one parking space? I believe before.
That's the only, because the rest is our driveway, so it's already unobstructed from cars during that time. So really, it's one space, yes.
I will say that I am a bit concerned about it being the one space on a very busy, otherwise very busy street, when, in my estimation, and I'm not a traffic engineer, it looks like there may be some other opportunities to be further pursued, such as with the adjacent property owner or along the,
He has no spaces available. So really, I mean, I was kind of taken aback when I was informed by the sergeant after giving those reasons that were just cited. He then told me, well, I think I have an idea. You can just call and purchase it. And that was a little bit of a gut punch to me because I feel like, so you're telling a nonprofit childcare independent school that we can go purchase the space, although all the reasons that you cited were
still present.
they're still present if I buy the spot or not. So is it revenue-driven decision or is it a safety decision?
So I knew nothing of the purchasing of the spot. My concern is very much the safety.
I mean, it's been working well. We put out cones, we take down cones, we make it very obvious because we have the spot that's directly in front and then the spots that would be the apron of the driveway. So we have like a big span, like 3 or 4 cars can fit there at once. And they all unload on the driver's side, excuse me. So it's a lot safer for the kids to be able to just exit the vehicle, go right to the teacher, and we have them in and out in 30 seconds, but.
And if there are children who are delivered by bus, you're saying that doesn't happen at present?
It doesn't happen yet.
But the bus's entrance is always on the right-hand side.
It's always on the right. Yes, but I guess they would have the stop thing. My only apprehension about the school bus is that if they can't find anywhere to pull to the side there, they're just going to block Lime Street. And I mean, that really won't be my problem necessarily because they're public school buses, but it's just from a traffic standpoint that I was bringing that up.
I recognize it's a very difficult site.
If you would have school buses, they wouldn't have to block Lime Street because they're going to be offloading on the left side, so they're going to have the lights on. So they're going to have to stop traffic in the first place anyway.
Yeah, I'm more worried about the time that they, at our other campus, which is also in the city on Columbia Avenue, they just stop there and they park there for half an hour while they wait for the kids.
No, that's because that's on the Curtis side. That's different. Your place is not on a.
But it's a one-way street, so they're just gonna. I think they'll just wait.
You're on the west side, which means if the school bus pulls up, it'll be the doors will be on the street side, so they have to stop traffic anyway.
When they actively load, I'm just worried about the time that they're waiting for the kids.
Are there comments or questions from any other members of the commission?
I was thinking one of the ideas is just to table this, take another look at it. The sergeant isn't here today to take a look at this, to see if there's a way we can remedy the.
I mean, I'd also like to add that then I'm gonna, because my obligation is to keep the kids safe. That means that now I'll be purchasing that space for another 60 days until the November meeting. Is that, I mean, we purchased places in the garage for all of our employees. We are doing our very best to be a great neighbor to all the residents there because I have deep respect for the neighborhood. And I feel like it's really asking a lot. Like our first thing was like, okay, let's look at the budget. But I mean, it could cost us upwards of $5,000 to purchase this one spot in order to the safety of the kids. And when I'm helping another part of the city who's doing a big childcare study to see if we have enough childcare in Lancaster City to serve the population, And then it's really disheartening to hear that we can't even safely load and unload the kids. I'm just not sure why.
I know, I will say that I understand and appreciate the situation you find yourself in. My background is planning, and my hope would have been that many of these things would have been resolved before the school doors opened. And I know that did not happen, but I think where we stand is needing to make sure that every opportunity can be explored.
We've explored every opportunity, and when the sergeant and I discussed it on the phone, the only other idea that he came up with was for me to purchase the space. So if that doesn't tell you something, I don't know. I mean, really, that was the idea.
I will say that it's still my inclination, especially since Sergeant is not available, for us to have more of a back and forth discussion of the variety of alternatives. My inclination would still be to defer it for further study and be able to have the next conversation. But I'm open to whatever the commission recommends.
Well, without Sergeant Joyce being here, I mean, to hear the reasonings behind not recommending the load zone, that's why I said I'd rather have it tabled. But I mean, it's up to the other commission members may have a different way to address this.
Other comments?
I guess I'd like to understand how is it working for you now with that one space? Maybe particularly in the, morning and afternoon. I know people tend to sort of stack up in the afternoon waiting for dismissal. So I'm just wondering if you.
I mean, we have coached. Yeah, I mean, we have really coached the parents to say, if you come early, we're going to have you go around the block because we don't want to block the street at all. And so far, knock on wood, it's been good. The morning is our busiest time because most of the kids arrive around the same time. And so that was always sort of our main focus because we knew between 8:30 and 9, there's 40 cars possibly. So that has been going well. We have not blocked traffic.
Are people mostly using that space, or are they using spaces sort of surrounding? Because you're mentioning that it's not really parked up, so.
It's not, but we've directed them to come right there because we have staff there ready to receive the kids and take them into the front door. So that's really the best option for them. But it's been working well with the one space, and so I don't know what else to really say. Yeah, we've committed to staffing it. We're overstaffed at this location specifically for the loading and unloading of the kids.
So currently you are paying for the space and using it, and you want to essentially continue using it the same way you are currently using it, but with, essentially without paying, with having a special use for that space.
Right, and just a sign that would say like, no parking during the school day, it would be preferable because even with the paying for the space, obviously if there's somebody parked there, I don't really have any options around it, just like, I guess you wouldn't then either, but because by the time they got a ticket or towed, it would be too late, but.
Yeah, it would be a loading zone. With whatever time, is relevant.
Right.
I just have a question. How many students do you have and how many parents do come? Like, is there more than one child that comes that was dropped off from the parents? Like
You mean, are some of them siblings?
Right.
Yep. We will have about 48 students. I think right now we have about 42 families, so there are some siblings, but not an overwhelming amount.
Thank you.
And all are dropped off by car? You said nearly 40
Yes.
drop-offs?
Yep.
I guess my inclination is if we want to table this, is, in a Sergeant Therese offered the paid option, if there could be a way for her to temporarily be able to use that space without having to pay for it.
And from whom did you purchase the space?
The parking authority.
Parking authority?
Mhm.
Is that?
It's $25 a day, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it adds up.
I understand. Might I ask if the parking authority might entertain the idea of working out something different for the short term while we put this under study?
I would
know that's
suggest,
a
I
fair
would suggest
question.
you give her a conditional approval. Conditional, and then we won't charge her for that period of, of time. But it comes back in November for approval, so it'd be a conditional.
So if it is something that we are willing to entertain as a conditional approval, you would need to understand that if it turns out in November that it comes out against you, that an alternate solution would need to be developed.
Sure.
Recommendations from the commission?
That's good.
I'd be willing to make a motion that we conditionally approve upon further study of the
I'll second that.
condition.
There's been a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed. I do want to say that we very much not only appreciate the Montessori School and all the work that you're doing, but we also appreciate that this is a difficult location on a state road, that is a truck route, that in and of its nature is not a safe street for school purposes in that particular sense. So I think we're that much more wanting to make sure that the best solution is developed.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
I'm sorry, does the application include the times, the loading zone times that you?
We included in the description the beginning, so we open at 7:30 a.m. And we close at 6 p.m.
If we modify the conditional to just include the school time parameters, so it can be used other times of the day and night.
People still use it at night, and we don't mind right now, even with the sign up. Like, people park there every night, and obviously it's fine. We're not open, so it doesn't matter.
Just put that.
Yep.
We need to amend the,
So we can enforce it.
Yeah, I would amend the motion then, I guess, to include, is Sep starting at 7:30 is okay?
Mhm.
To conditionally approve from 7:30 a.m. to 6 p.m.
there's been a recommendation for an amendment. Are you okay with that?
Yes.
Is it seconded with the amendment?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much. And I guess you'll let us know how we need to proceed with the,
Yes,
okay, thank you.
thank you as well. The next item is item 40-2024, considering the request of Stacy Neff to restrict parking spaces at the northeast corner of College and Hager Street to improve the site distance. Ms. Neff?
It should be Hager Alley.
Hager Alley? Hager Street, okay.
Good afternoon, thank you. My name is Stacy Neff. I live at the 700 block of Columbia Avenue. The concern is Hager Alley, which is right behind our home right there. Right there, there's a couple issues. Where that white vehicle is, used to be, a couple years ago, there was a hearing aid facility right there that was a loading zone. It was no parking, which made visibility pulling out from Hager Alley ideal. Now that there is parking permitted there, which is a blessing for the neighbors, I understand that. However, it makes visibility when pulling out of that alley a little more challenging. We have to pull out further to be able to see the traffic coming from College Avenue. And right there, that's a picture from my car. That bush right there prevents visibility from seeing pedestrians come right there on that sidewalk. We don't see them until they're right there at that traffic post. And a lot of times there are children, there are people jogging, people going at a high rate of speed on their feet, and it makes it tricky when you're driving to react quickly when you only see them right there, when you can't see them further back. If that bush was gone, it would, in my opinion, be a lot safer for drivers. And in addition, that vehicle, see right there when you go to pull out, it makes it difficult to see the opposing traffic. So my request is to have that bush removed. I'm not sure quite how that process works. I do not know the landlord at that property. I don't know if that's just me being a good neighbor, knocking on his door and saying, would you mind cutting down your bush? Or, which I'm very willing to do if I know who it is. I've lived in the city 21 years. I'm very willing to be amicable with my neighbors. But of course, the parking spot is way out of our hands, so.
Thank you. Are there any comments at the commission level? Recommendations, commentary?
So we did, staff did look at this intersection, and noted the things that, were noted here, including the fact that there was a loading zone. So for that reason, and parking is restricted on all the other corners of the intersection, that we did look at, both directions. So we were recommending that parking be restricted where that loading zone previously was located. And this is a diagram that Van Hogan developed that includes there on the bottom right corner installing a no parking sign, which is approximately 33 feet from the curb line of Hager Alley.
Is there any further, so it's a recommendation to restrict parking at that location, have a no parking sign present, and still possibly encourage you to talk to your neighbor?
Yes, I can certainly do that, yeah. I'll figure that out. I wasn't sure if anything the Traffic Commission can do about that, or if that's a me thing to.
I would say if it was in the public right-of-way, we could definitely,
Issue a notice?
issue notice, for it to be removed. I'm not sure, I'm assuming the Hager Alley right-of-way probably runs along the curb line, so.
Okay.
Probably more of a, but again, if you have any issues or anything, feel free to reach out to engineering, and we can
Sure.
try and assist.
So that was the recommendation of staff. Is there any further comment from the commission?
Do we need to take a motion on this, or is this administrative?
It would be removing parking, so it would need action from the.
Okay, so we'll make a motion to remove 33 feet on the first block of College Avenue. That's 4020-2024.
There's been a motion. Is there a second? Motion and a second. Is there further discussion? Any further comment from the public? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries.
Just to let you know, we don't have two Hager Streets. We have a Hager Street and a Hager Alley.
Oh, yes, this is Hager Alley.
Very good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Neff. The next item on the agenda is item 41-2024, considering the request of Brian Rank to restrict parking at Burroughs Avenue and Franklin Street due to sightline issues. Mr. Rank?
Yes. Brian Rank, 500 block of Burroughs Avenue. The issue that I'm having is, as you stated, the intersection coming from the 500 block of Burroughs Avenue to Franklin Street, right there. On the left side, when the cars are parked completely from the telephone pole that you see in the middle of the image there, there's actually no park, there's a fire hydrant, no parking at the other side of those cars, going back to the other telephone pole. When that area is full, there's really zero visibility to cars coming on that stretch of road to the left. And it's basically, when I'm there, I wait as long as I can, because I can see beyond the second telephone pole, and I can see cars there, but you can't see a car turning onto Franklin across the street, or from the opposite side of that second telephone pole. So basically, it's a sort of a leap of faith many times when that side of the road is full. That usually happens that usually is full during weekends and mornings and evenings when people are home. But during the day, usually there's a car or two missing where you can see a little bit better. But there's many times where it's very difficult to see incoming cars, and I've had a couple of near misses. I've been beeped at a few times just because I had waited as long as I could, but I just couldn't see the cars turning onto the road there.
Anything further that you want to share? No.
Yeah, I mean, well, my original request was to see if we could, put that pole right there would be perfect to just put a mirror on. That would, for me, that would be my preferred way of doing it, but I understand that. I looked back at the meetings for the commission for a few years ago, and I saw that that's not an approved traffic method. So that, yeah, for me, because I would, because the other two intersections on that street at, let's see where it is. Well, basically the next two intersections on that road going left up there had parking restricted fairly recently, which probably added to the fact that there were more cars right where the issue for me is. But that would potentially be the option, though I wish I will only do that if there's no other option, because parking is very tight in that area, and I would rather not restrict parking.
Let's see if staff took a look at it and have any recommendations.
Yeah, staff did review, this is a diagram that Ben Hogan developed that, yes, the recommendation is restricting parking on that northern side of Franklin. Yeah, generally, if there were crosswalks on that side, we could automatically say that, there's no parking within 20 feet of the crosswalk, but since there's not a crosswalk on that side of the street, we would have to restrict parking. So his recommendation was basically 20 feet on the west side and 26 feet on the east side.
So that's the staff recommendation. Is there any further comment or questions from the commission? Any questions or comments from the public?
Well, I don't think that, is there a way to just say, don't look at the other side of the street? Because I don't think that's ever been an issue, even for anybody coming out there. To the other side of Burroughs. That's all garages back there. There's no homes that open on that street, and rarely people come up through there. It's not wide enough for two vehicles, so people just go out the other way. Like I said, don't want less parking.
I mean, that's up to the commission.
So the staff recommendation was for the spaces on the north and the south side of the street. The request amended, possibly for just the one on the north side of the street.
It's the west side, right? Is that the?
Yeah, it'd be the west side.
Yeah.
Sorry. Do I hear a motion or?
Yes, so moved. 41-2024.
Both spaces or one space?
Both, yes.
I think it would be both. I'm guessing that regardless of the traffic that he may not see, maybe he's at work, that there could be other traffic coming from the other direction that could also be having the same issue.
Mhm.
And traffic on that street is very heavy, especially after they're let out of school.
True, yeah.
I'm familiar with that. I use Franklin a lot.
Yeah.
So I'm very familiar with that and the, many of the cross streets there.
So the motion is to restrict parking from both of those parking spaces on the west and east side. Is there a second? A second? There's a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Any further comment from the public? Hearing none?
I had a question, just informational in regard to that specifically. If in the unlikely chance I got approval from PPL to put a mirror on that telephone pole, would that violate any thing? Does the city would have a problem with that? Do you know?
Yeah, I have concerns with that. Just, maintenance, is one issue, and then just, unintended consequences, I guess, related to the mirror. And I just don't know that it's something that it's a pretty wide intersection, so, people actually looking at it or using it, I don't think would be something that would be useful for.
Okay, thank you.
So if there's no other comments or questions, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
The next item is item 42-2024, considering the request of Union Community Care to present the land redevelopment plan for 234 West Orange Street. Thank you so much for your patience.
Yeah, no problem. I'm Ben Morton with RGS Associates representing Union Community Care. So just as a brief overview, this project is at 234 West Orange Street and is going to repurpose the existing building there to be a medical office. And as part of the project, we're looking to sort of rationalize the layout of the parking lot, ultimately reducing impervious surface on the property. There's also an existing parking deck over garage spaces at the southern end of the site the deck portion will be removed and some parking will be put in place kind of where those garages are underneath. And so kind of to consolidate down what we're looking for here, there are two existing access drives on West Orange Street that we are looking to consolidate into a single drive. And then associated with that, we see two metered parking spaces that PennDOT safe site stopping distance requirements will require the removal of, though it does appear that there's room for a space that is just kind of a no man's land that's unmetered, a little bit further east of those that we could restore one space in that location. And then down on West Branch Street, there are 4 driveways right now, one that connects to that upper parking area, and then 3 that are driveways to garages. And we're looking to consolidate the middle 2 driveways into a single access drive for the lower parking lot.
Would that net an increase in parking on the grant?
What's that?
Would that net an increase in parking on grant?
No, not exactly. Or, I'm sorry, net increase?
By consolidating the 2 driveway entrances into a single driveway entrance, does that make space for a parking space?
Oh, on the street itself? It does not, because the roadway itself is only about 16 feet wide.
Okay, thank you. Did staff take a look at this one?
We did review it. I don't think there's any major concerns other than the suggestion of the removal of the 2 metered parking spaces. PennDOT stopping site distance can be pretty large within the city. It could be half a block long, and if we're doing that at every driveway, we won't have any parking in the city. So that is my concern. Have they already indicated that this will be required, or?
No, we're still working through some of the scoping with them. So our hope, and maybe to explain here a little bit as well, we know that PennDOT process is going to take quite a while on this project, but there are some time constraints for us to be able to start doing work that's actually in the building and getting through the land development process, whereby we're trying to get that going, and we will be working through the PennDOT process as we can. And so our hope here with what we've included in this request was to obtain, a conditional approval from the Traffic Commission related to these items that would be conditioned upon the approval of the minor land development plan and city engineer's review. Certainly, Union Community Care would prefer that those spaces remain, so it's something that we want to look at how we can push PennDOT on that, but wanted to cover it here as just something that's being contemplated as part of the request. I think in terms of just the impact that this change will have to the streetscape, right now there are two quite wide access drives that are not ADA compliant, and we'll be reducing that to a single point, which I think will make it easier both for vehicles to know how to access the site as well as for the pedestrian experience.
Yeah, agreed. The consolidation is definitely a plus.
Lauren, do you have any other insight? I don't know if it's gone far enough in the land use.
Yeah, I mean, we support the continual moving of this plan. They have been through sketch plan review. So once they have all of their commission approvals, they're ready to go forward with land development, so.
Is there any possible solution that doesn't require the elimination of either or both of those metered spaces? Are you aware of any option that doesn't require?
Not exactly. I mean, it's going to be part of the discussion process with PennDOT and advocating for the importance of those spaces. And that's really where we are with trying to keep those. I think there is the question of whether there's only one meter there that has 2 meter heads, and I think how the striping is appears to only be 2 spaces, but we do, as indicated on the other drawings, see that there's some space for parking that's to the east between the current restriction that's towards North Arch Street.
So you think you could have one space?
Yeah, so I think it looks like we could have one space in that location, so it'd just be shifted eastward.
Does Parking Authority want to opine at all? Would you
I mean,
like to
we didn't see the plans, so I can't comment on it, but obviously, shocking, we don't want to lose our limited resource of metered space there. So we'd be happy to take a look at it, provide any support we can to help in that process.
I'm sorry, I'm not hearing the last part of what you just said.
I said we haven't
Take a look at it.
Yeah, we haven't seen the plan. We'd be more than happy to take a look at it to see if we had any ideas of how the 1 or 2 spaces could be maintained.
Yeah, I mean, we can certainly share the plans, and, if there are other ideas on how. I think that the parking restriction from North Arch Street, it seems like maybe that's something that could potentially be adjusted as well.
Okay.
So I'm basically hearing that we don't have any challenge with it except for possibly losing the 1 or 2 metered spaces. Am I hearing that correctly?
Right.
So is it time sensitive where you need an answer now, or could it be conditioned upon a review by the Parking Authority or something like that? I'm not sure what's appropriate here.
Well, I think, and based on some other projects that we've had with time sensitivity on land development approvals, and the 2-month schedule for traffic commission, we have had the conditions be, I think, as straightforward as the need to obtain land development approval, which means we satisfy the comments that are generated as part of that review. And sometimes I think it's also been conditioned upon the approval of the city engineer, and therefore you'll still have essentially the representative of this commission to enforce the idea that we're going to see if we can keep both spaces, and if there is a reduction to one, that was due to the PennDOT permitting process, which we're kind of up against.
We could entertain being able to approve it subject to PennDOT approval.
Yeah, I guess that's what we have to do.
Yeah.
I would just, continue to advocate for, you understand.
Yeah, and we would,
And just from
as a project, would prefer to have the spaces be there.
Yeah, I don't know.
a
As I said,
pedestrian experience standpoint.
as I said, I don't know who utilizes those spaces during the day. So we probably would want to take a look. Unfortunately, every project that comes forth wants to take away street space. So, be worth taking a look at. I mean, James and I spoke about the parking in the lot. We never had a conversation about on street. So we just want to make sure it doesn't, if there is a loss of one or two, or probably want to identify who's going to be impacted by that.
So we're willing to hear a motion or some sort of conditional approval.
We'll make a motion for conditional approval of 42-2024.
The condition being subject to
Subject to PennDOT
approval of the one or two, depending on their determination of whether those spaces can stay. One or two of those spaces can stay. I don't want it said that way. I want it said.
Could the motion include, I guess, what Ben's request was? And then, and the part about the parking spaces would be conditioned on the PennDOT approval?
Yeah.
That would be a conditional approval, everything that is subject to further review by PennDOT.
And Mindy, you have that, right? The request?
Is that a clear request? You have the request? You have the request in bed, the original request in bed?
So it would be the, whatever was in the packet that Ben sent.
Yeah, I'm trying to bring that up here.
3 items: remove and consolidate the 2 existing access drives on West Orange Street into a single driveway. Remove and consolidate the 2 driveways on West Orange into a single access drive. And Ben, do you have, I guess these plans, do they show dimensions and like that kind of, it doesn't matter, that can be conditioned on engineering approval?
Yep.
And then conditionally approve the 2 metered spaces on West Orange, if required by PennDOT to comply with safe site stopping, site distance. And the 1 and 2 would be conditioned on engineering approval.
Okay. Is that a clear?
Yes.
Is that clear? So there's a motion on the table. Is there a second to it?
I'll second it.
There's a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? This means conditional approval, subject to basically subject to PennDOT review. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I think we should then go back to the old business. Are Mr. Sweeney, Mr. Velez, or Ms. Atencio present? So ordinarily,
So I do have, information on, 28, 24, and I believe Mindy has information on 30 and 32.
okay, so for 2824, it's considering the request of Matthew Sweeney to limit parking to one side of the street on Prangley Avenue or make it unidirectional. The street is too narrow to have parking on both sides. We're going back to old business.
So, Ben Hogan did an evaluation of this block. Basically, Prangley Avenue is 30 feet wide, meaning with parking on both sides. The travel lane is basically 16 feet wide when, the blocks are fully parked. And this isn't sufficient for vehicles to pass side by side. You generally want about 9 or 10 feet. 10 feet desirable for each direction, so 20 feet, so this is 16. So the street needs to function more like a yield street, where, oncoming traffic has to yield to traffic coming in the other direction. This is similar to other locations that we have in the city, like East Frederick Street. So we don't believe that, changing it to one-way or removing parking on one side, obviously that would create a large hardship for the neighborhood. So we don't believe that that's a proper solution either. The yield streets, I think, lead to more sort of calming of traffic. And in this situation, I guess we would just recommend that it stay as it currently exists. Also note that I think a third of this street is in Lancaster Township as well. The only other recommendation we have is adding the yield to oncoming vehicle signs sort of posted at each end. And this diagram is actually showing where there is currently no parking on the block, so there are some opportunities for vehicles to sort of pull to the side to let other vehicles pass.
So the recommendation would be to keep it as is, but add the yield to oncoming traffic signs.
Yeah.
So we can recommend to deny 28, 2024.
And would one still add the yield to oncoming traffic signs?
That could be done
Administrative. Very good. So are you making that a motion?
Yes.
A motion to deny, recognizing that the yield signs can be added administratively. Is there a second?
Seconded.
Is there a motion and a second? Is there any further comment?
We don't have a quorum.
Oh. Okay, we'll hold off on that for the moment.
So we can continue to play chicken on Prangley Avenue.
Yes, that's correct. Hopefully not at rapid speed.
Yeah.
Okay, we may have our quorum member arriving. So we're.
Yes, get to sit in it.
So, Ms. Diaz, there's been a motion for item 2024 to deny the request and administratively add, which is to either turn it into one-way traffic or remove the parking. It was suggested that that was not wise in either case, that this should be considered a yield street, and therefore, at an administrative level, we can add signs that say yield to oncoming traffic without reducing parking or making other changes. So the motion has been to deny this request. It's been seconded, and we're now looking to vote.
Okay.
Do you have any comments?
No.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Item 30, 2024, considering the request of Joel Velez, Jorel Owens, Zach Mellinger, and Rydell Velez to install speed bumps on Reynolds Avenue.
The trailer is at the location for 12 days and the highest speed is 35 miles per hour. Although it seems as though there is a speed issue at location, the speed trailers have determined that there is not.
So if the speed trailer shows that it is not at the speeds that were directed, are we proposing to deny this request?
Yes, I would make a motion to deny 30/20/24.
There's a motion. Is there a second? Is there any further discussion? Any from the public? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That's denied. Thank you. The last one under old business is 32-2024. Consider the request of Adriana Atencio to address speeding concerns on North Prince Street from Liberty Street to Harrisburg Avenue. This, I believe, had been raised at the last meeting.
The trailers were placed at the 500 block and the 800 block of North Prince Street for 30 days. The police department recognizes that there is an issue for the police street corridor with speeding. The department will conduct details most likely during grant periods, otherwise they will have to use overtime.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part, otherwise?
They will have to do details with overtime.
So they're saying they're going to do, they're gonna add the speed trailer to the rotation, or they're gonna do a speed details?
Details.
Speed details, okay.
So this means that this can continue to stay tabled until next?
No, unless there's other action that we think we're going to take. I think this is just, yeah, the police are going to enforce speed that way. So unless there's other action, I think we would just
So it says,
deny, because the traffic commission isn't really taking any specific action.
very good. Any motion?
I'll second that.
A motion by Cindy, seconded by Dino to deny. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. We got through old and action agenda items. There's the consent. Usually we deal with these rather quickly.
We can consolidate these.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to consolidate 43/2024, 44/2024, 45/2024 into one motion.
And the motion is?
Is to approve.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. The consent decree is over. Is there any additional business? Hearing none. I'm open to a motion to adjourn.
Now, we're going to stick around.
So moved.
Motion and second. Is there a second? Okay. Motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.